I'd like to formally invite you to the very first Metro Lives in Cape Town. It's the first of three. Two others will be held in Johannesburg as well as in Durban in the months to come. This is brought to you by Change Ideas, DGMT, Hold My Hand, and the KFW Cities for Children. It's happening during an election year. The local government elections are happening towards the end of the year. It's an important conversation, and we have one central question in mind, and that question is, what can municipalities do to create an environment in which children and families can thrive? Now, we've invited local political leaders because we wanted to hear from them, but I must stress, this is not an election debate. This is an election challenge. And that challenge is to put children at the center of our local government planning and decision making. And for us as the public to ask that and to hold them accountable, of course. So to be able to do that, we need to know who our local leaders are, the ones that are on stage, those that will join us in Johannesburg and in Durban, and our local leaders across the country. So before we start, I'd like to do a little exercise to get a sense of who is in the audience, but also your level of local government engagement or your engagement with local government issues. So I'm going to ask just 3 simple questions. You can answer by silently lifting your hand. So the first question is, raise your hand if you know who your local ward councillor is in your neighborhood. Not your mother-in-laws, not your aunties. Okay? It's an even split. Thank you. The second question is, raise your hand if you have engaged on any matter with your local ward councillor. Good. Same people have lifted their hands. And the bonus question, raise your hand if you have spoken to your local ward councillor about issues related to children. Thank you. Right, so this is important. This is important because we need to know who our local leaders are. We need to engage with them if we are to partner with them to build child-friendly communities. So without further delay, let's get started. I'm going to call my first speaker. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the DG Murray Trust, David Harrison, and he'll be giving an opening address. David.
Thanks very much, Rahima, and good evening to everybody in the audience, live, as well as all the people that are online as well. We've received a very good response, and it's fantastic to see everybody here. Thank you too for the panelists. We really appreciate your being here, taking the time, and look forward to what you are to say. Imagine if every one of the 180 children born in the city of Cape Town today had enough love, enough food, enough safety, enough brain power today, tomorrow, the next day, and the next, we would change the future of our city. There would be fundamentally a different trajectory of young people growing up differently. And they, in turn, would be more educated, healthier, less likely to participate in crime, more included in our society. So what I'm saying is that really, if push comes to shove, it is the experience of children in the city of Cape Town today that is going to determine the future of the city. And that's not an exaggeration. It's probably the single biggest predictor of what this city is going to look like in 20 years' time. That's how profound it is. It's about the life experience of children. It's about how they encounter their environment. And that's why our conversation today is so important. Section 157 of the Constitution places responsibility on local government for ensuring a safe and healthy environment. But we know across the country that doesn't happen for every single child. that for at least a third of the children in our country, their experience is very different. Their experience is of a series of insults, a series of vicious dominoes that keep knocking them down. They're conceived to moms who don't have enough food to eat. They're exposed to high levels of alcohol in the womb. When they're born, their moms often have to wean them early because they can't breastfeed. Onto bottles that are washed in dirty water. And they experience bad sanitation. And they're the children who don't get to early learning programs and get into school, more likely to drop out, less likely to participate in our economy, more likely to participate in gangsterism and crimes. It's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. But imagine if we could replace those vicious dominoes with virtuous ones. If we could stimulate a positive chain reaction for children by putting in place all of the virtuous inputs that cumulatively result in children being able to thrive and to reach their potential. It's not a pipe dream. It can be done. And we're going to hear today what local government's responsibility is. But even as we think about those various inputs that I've spoken about, we know that local government has a role to play in local food production and supply. I was in China recently and just seen how local government is involved in agrarian processes, even in urban areas, increasing the amount of land that's available for local nutritious food production. In South Africa, it's local government that is responsible for determining liquor trading hours, the density of liquor outlets, whether they're open in communities on a Sunday. It's local government that has a role to play in ensuring access to water and sanitation and to some extent to housing. Local government has a role to play in ensuring that children are able to have access to facilities for early childhood development. And local government has a responsibility to ensure that the obstacles to early learning, the health and nutritional standards that they need to meet, that they are made accessible, that they can overcome many of the obstacles that they face as well. And it's local government that has a responsibility to ensure that children can play safely on playgrounds as they grow up. And here we're not only talking about small children, but we're talking about adolescents as well, who we want to experience joyful life and not life in the gangs. I'm just citing some of them. And so the question tonight, and the question that's going to be put to each of the panelists, is this. This is not a pipe dream. It's a requirement of the Constitution. It's an expectation of safe and healthy cities. How clear is your vision? How concrete your plans to ensure that every child in the metropolitan municipality of Cape Town, regardless of where they live, is able to thrive? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for those powerful words. We're now going to go to the heart of today's event, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Kentse Radebe, who's the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the DGMT Trust. Kentse has extensive experience leading public dialogue, bringing together diverse perspectives on some of South Africa's most pressing social issues. So over to you, Kentse.
Thanks, Rahima, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. Quickly, just before we get started, I did just want to extend apologies from Cheslin Daniels, who was meant to join us this evening, but he's unable to join. But we are joined by my colleague, Kwanda Ndoda, who's going to be participating in I think what's going to be a very rigorous but also enjoyable conversation. I saw that my panelists are very diligent. They came with notepads and highlights and underlined. And I did let them know that I might go rogue. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to also bring you into that conversation as well. But let me start off with introducing our panelists so that you have a sense of who do we have in the room. I'm going to start on my right. I'm joined by Sarah Roberts. Sarah is the Western Cape Commissioner for Children. Her mandate is to promote and protect the rights, needs, and interests of children in the province. She has more than 3 decades of experience in the legal field before she joined as the commissioner. And she also served as the acting magistrate in the Family and Children's Court at the Blue Downs Magistrate Court. So I think bringing a lot of good experience around practically what's happening on the ground and the experiences of children. And then on my right, I'm joined by Brett Herron, who has an extensive history serving in different roles in public office here in the city of Cape Town. Between 2016 and 2018, he was the mayoral committee member for transport and urban development, responsible for transport, spatial planning, as well as housing. In 2024, in May, he was re-elected to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. He's also a founding partner in Complexity and Urban Consultancy, and he was Good's Cape Town mayoral candidate in the 2021 local government elections. I'm also joined by our Deputy Mayor, Eddie Andrews, who oversees the city's infrastructure and urban growth portfolio. He directly reports to the Mayor, and he's also currently co-leading the city's early childhood development task team since its establishment in 2022. And then finally, Kwanda Ndoda, who is a development practitioner with extensive experience doing work at the intersection of early childhood development, systems change, and public policy. He's currently leading the project on Cities for Children at the DG Murray Trust. And most importantly, one of the things that he asked me to emphasize, but I think it's an important conversation based on what we'll be talking about today, is that number one, he is a father, but he's also doing extensive care work in the home. And I feel that I challenge him on that. And I'd need to speak to his wife to verify that. But an important place to start, and I think David set the scene for us, and I did want to start on an optimistic note. So one of the things that I want each of our panelists to reflect on, and I'll start with you, Sarah, is if we had to view the city through the eyes of a child, what would that tell us about the life of a child in Cape Town today?
First of all, when she said more than 30 years, I realized I'm not the bright-eyed 21-year-old anymore. So that question can be answered if you have 2 different children from 2 different backgrounds here.
Exactly.
Because in the one instance, a 16-year-old will tell you, I walk to my school. My school is walking distance. I walk through a park. Mommy sees me off. Mom would be at home if I come back after school. I will have sport after school first. And then I will come back. I would maybe have some hockey practice, which is at school. And the other child will tell you, I'm waking up at 4:30 in the morning because I have to be at the taxi at 5:30. Then I have to drive with public transport on my own to a school in another district. If I come back, might be police incidents. So that question is depending on who you ask the question. And tonight we are now here. We are all adults making decisions or commenting on children, but there's no child to also tell us this is my lived experience. So I think the big thing is we must start hearing the voice of the child. We are adults when we want to make decisions, and we must make decisions. I always say a child cannot make a decision, but their voice must be heard. They sometimes have very good ideas, and sometimes we miss what really is going on in communities or what they foresee as safe spaces. I talk about having a safe space, but for instance, for local government, we'll say, but we have a park. But is that a safe space? Is the child safe there? So that's the type of conversations I think we should have with children living in communities. And that's why at junior town councils, for instance, it's such an important role to play because you have the voice of a child living there in that community. But that would depend on who you ask. Short answer.
Eddie, let me bring you into the conversation, reflecting on the same question, but positioning it in some of the work that you're doing. One of the pieces of work that you speak about a lot is just the rapid urbanization that's happening across South Africa. Over 60% of families are living in cities, and we know that it isn't unique to what the experiences we're seeing here in the city of Cape Town. Thinking about that complexity and what that means for planning, infrastructure, financing, how should we think about how a child views, or should be thinking about how a child should be centered when we think about cities?
Why did you modify the question now?
We're going
Because
to-
as Sarah was talking, I was reflecting, that was my life, the latter part. I hated getting up at 4:30 in the morning. The bus that I took from the Cape Flats was at 6:05. And if you were to ask 12-year-old Eddie Andrews how you viewed the city, I think even as much as we've grown as a city, we are rendering services, there's still pockets where we need to do a lot more. And I'm responding in that context. I would then ask the question rather than respond to your question. I would say, why is it that I would need to get up at 4:30 in the morning? Why is it that I don't see my parents before they leave for work? And why is it they only return home at night after the sun has set? And by the way, why do I need to share a room with a sibling? Or different context, why are we sharing an informal dwelling unit, a hockey or a shack? Why are we staying there? And why does mother tell me it's unsafe to go and play in the public open space? What are we defining as safety? What does that look like? And unfortunately, in Cape Town, we are in a growth environment. We are managing growth. Cape Town is a desirable city to stay in, and we have to plan accordingly. And the child, and one of the reasons why we've established the task team, the child absolutely is the center of that conversation. Why? David mentioned, because in 20, 30 years' time, they'll be the policymakers. And if we don't get the foundational blocks right, then we have failed them. So to answer the question in terms of how a child views the city, it would be from that lens. Why am I spending a lot more hours on the road? Why would my area be deemed unsafe, depending on, because I'm representing the latter part of your response. And also from the city's perspective, do we have a plan? Do we have a plan to respond to that particular context? And with those individuals, with those communities, by the way, are they aware of the plan? And how are they engaging with that plan that we have put on the table?
Maybe whilst I have you in the hot seat, one of the things that Sarah was speaking to is how do we get children to participate? How do you see children participating in that plan and responding to that vision?
Giving them a voice. I think you mentioned the Junior City Council. We are fortunate that we have a healthy Junior City Council structure. We have approximately 50 learners, across, representing across schools across the metro, who are part of our policy processes. So they are consulted. Whenever there's an engagement, we consider them part of that structure. We are now also advising or encouraging them to be part of the ward committee structures. So it's a legislative structure of council, and you have about 10 seats in each of our 116 wards, just to be active. But most importantly, I would say to them that your voice matters, because often you would have sort of apathy from the youth. Why do I need part of this conversation? Are you even listening to me? My views? Will it find expression in your policy document? Give me examples. And are you responding to my context?
So maybe threading that through, Brett, one of the things that you've always championed is access to the city, affordable housing, hunger. That's been a critical issue for us in the country, but also particularly here in the Western Cape. How do we think about these issues? Maybe thinking about what Eddie's also framed as the opportunity, but also the very real challenge of the lived experience of families who are grappling with these challenges on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I mean, for a decade, I've been using the phrase, where people live matters. But certainly where children live matters, and how they live, and how they grow up, and what is the environment. And you asked the question earlier, how does a child see the city? And Sarah said it correctly. It depends on the child and the circumstances in which they are living in. But a child could tell us that she slept in a shack on the floor. She didn't get breakfast in the morning because there was no food in the house. She walked to school past what is supposed to be a play park, but had to avoid young men, boys, girls dealing. And after school, she went to go and play in the park. The swings were broken. When she fell off the jungle gym, she fell on a concrete surface. And then you could ask another child, and she would have her own bedroom. She would be driven to school by her mother or her father, or a caregiver. She may play in the neighborhood park, and she would fall on a rubberized surface and not be injured. And she would have a full meal in the evening with her family, having had a lunch and a breakfast. So, how children experience cities is complicated. It's complex. There's several layers, and we should avoid simplifying, as I've just done, because it is a combination of a historical pattern in our society. So I've described two children, and without even saying it, without a child saying it, you're basically describing the apartheid spatial plan and the failure to address it 32 years into our democracy, that you can actually tell from what a child would describe to you their day, how their day went, where they got to play, whether they had a sports field, whether the sports field is irrigated, whether they have a sports program that's managed. You can tell from the description of a child's day that whether they live in an area that was created under apartheid for African children, or what was called colored children, or white children. And unfortunately, in 32 years, we haven't done enough to fix the apartheid spatial plan and everything that goes with it. And one of the big challenges that is growing right now in the Western Cape, you mentioned hunger, is hunger. 53% of the people who live in Cape Town are food insecure. That means those children are food insecure. And we cannot, I don't think we can, as city leaders and planners, leave food insecurity to charities and to the auntie on the corner who cooks soup once a week. The response to food insecurity needs to be institutionalized.
And maybe, Kwanda, maybe for you to then reflect on what does the city look like from the eyes of a child, but also reflecting on, I think, a lot of the work that you've been driving around how our services should find children where they are. What does that look like for you?
So I would say first, it's about an ecosystem's community-focused approach to putting children at the center. That book titled Why Nations Fail speaks to having proper institutions brings a country up, helps develop a country. So it's all about the institutions. It's not that rich countries can afford the institutions. It's about the good institutions. So institutions such as municipalities, but also homes, we need to be looking at, you're talking about hunger, Brett. You need to go into people's homes to actually understand what their state is in terms of their hunger. So all of the institutions together need to put putting children at the center. What the child sees needs to be what emboldens the child to explore. Okay, so that's why children need to feel safe, because children need to be able to explore, they need to learn, they need to have their caregivers close to them, to be watching them, and also to be looking back at their caregivers before they explore new things. These are the environments that you must create for children. So what the project is aiming to do, the KFW, it's not called the Cities for Children project. It's called Little Big Futures.
Nice.
Little Children, Big Futures. And that project seeks to create an ecosystem of support for children. So whether it's friendly spaces where families can actually engage each other and just be, so children, their siblings, their grandparents. For example, if we've talked about the experience of my child today before I left here, he went to the park with his mom. There's a bench, there's a fountain, there's speed bumps on the road, so cars can't drive by quickly. There's enough pavement space for people to jog, so there's swings, and as you said, it's safe, it's tranquil, it's an environment where the caregiver feels safe and they can just focus on the child, and the child feels safe, they can explore. And so that is what the project tries to have be implemented, even in spaces where we know there's low income and high violence, which is obviously a huge challenge. But if you can create those oases of people to have that experience, that's what the project tries to accomplish.
Sure. I want to build on this piece around institutions, because I think from all of the different responses that we're hearing is that they're critical for ensuring that we're able to meet children where they are. But Sarah, I want to bring you back into the conversation now. As the commissioner, you're probably seeing where we are failing children, where we're missing them and they're falling through the crack because institutions aren't able to meet them where they are. What are some of the things that you're seeing as an opportunity to shift that? And I'd like you to speak about it from the perspective that makes it very pragmatic for people to understand, what are these institutions? What do they mean to me? And how do I interact and engage with them?
I think what I realized, I'm not from a NGO, or that was never my background. So when I came into this position, it was actually for me also an eye-opener to work in communities and realize that there are so many institutions, NGOs, government departments that do work in a municipality. But the people living in that community, they don't know about the services. They don't know how to access the services. And for me, that was a big lack, because I asked the question from local government, DSD, did they do mapping of an area? So I came from Drakensberg municipality today, where we have started our awareness campaign. But the idea of the awareness campaign is we had all the different departments that work with children there, with their pamphlets, people could speak, but to see, okay, this is where if you need a child, if your child has behavior problems, this is the help that there is. Government, NGOs, and connect the people with the services. Because again, they are really beautiful. Like a lot of the work is done by NGOs. A lot of the work is done by NGOs. But there are also organizations, but people don't know about that. How do you access it? So, and that's what I quickly realized. Unfortunately, government, NGOs, NPOs sometimes work in silos.
Often.
This is my territory, so I'm going to do this. And that happens in communities as well, where you should actually have a forum to say, okay, once a month, we come together, the child organizations, and we sit and we discuss what is the issue in our area. Don't look at the whole of the Western Cape. Don't look at the whole of the city.
Yeah.
This is my community. And I think we should also involve our ward councillors, because remember, they're also part of local government. They are elected. I think, if I'm not correct, and I'm not in politics, but that is actually the only person that you vote for by name. I can't vote for the president. I don't know who the president is going to be. I don't know who the mayor is going to be. But I have a ward councillor. So shouldn't that ward councillor, which I help elect, assist me in my community? Because that person must live in that community. And that person must be the first person that I can contact to get services. But I don't know if that happens. So connecting people are just, and if a parent struggles, if it's behavior challenges, education, whatever, or a special needs child, sometimes you are so tired and deflated and you just don't get help. You're alone, but you're not alone.
Yeah.
So a big thing is, I think we must start connecting or mapping areas to see what services is available for parents or for children in a specific community, and have that somewhere in a website. Let the local government have a website on that. Let City of Cape Town or Drakensberg or Witzenberg have a website on that you can tap into that.
Maybe just to stay on that, Sarah. So one of the pieces that I often find quite important in the work that we do is acknowledging the assets that already exist in our community. So Kwanda started off speaking about caregivers and the role that they play. All of these services that you're speaking to, mapping them out, people experience them really differently, based on even the examples that you shared earlier. So I'm curious around, what are you seeing emerging that's coming up as key issues that could be levers to start that conversation to say, these services exist, but they're not reaching these children, or we're not implementing in a particular way. What does that look like to you?
I can give you guys an example. So we had a child rights workshop in an area. I'm not going to mention the municipality. So that is where my office goes, and we have workshops with the children in that area. Just the children, to see, okay, so how do you experience your community? What would you like the municipality to do? What did you like the school to do? What is a safe space? What makes you afraid? Where can't you walk? Things, everything. And one thing that came up is in that specific community, there were high pregnancy rates. I mean, it skyrocketed, 18% in a year. So we went to the children and asked, but guys, why? What is going on? And then the simple thing is, the girl said, we don't want to go to the clinic. The sisters are rude. And they know my grandmother. She lives next to my grandmother. She's going to ask her, wat maak jy nou hierso? So that was the issue. So we went back to Department of Health and said, listen, this is what the kids say. What is your solution? And they, in that area, and I can say it's Witzenberg area in Ceres, the Department of Health now has a dedicated mobile clinic with one sister that only goes to every school. And every child, we went back a year later and we asked children, okay, this was the complaint. And the first thing the kid said, do you know about Sister Blom? And that made such a huge difference. A simple thing. It's not rocket science. But if no one have asked the kids, because everyone is speculating, why are all the girls pregnant? But go to the girls and ask them, why are you not doing family planning? What's going on? So the kids have very practical solutions. We sometimes just have to listen. So I hope that's one of the examples, but they have a lot of examples. I mean, one of those mapping, they actually gave to the police and said, yeah, here's the tick case, there's that, and that's where it is.
Building on the piece around institutions, Eddie, I want to bring you back into the conversation, because I think the examples that you're giving are quite relevant here around the hyper-local experience and what we can do. And I think part of the ECD task force is around supporting, particularly in this case, early learning programs. I want to shift gears and talk about some of that work, Eddie. And what I want you to focus on is just some of the challenges that have been highlighted that exist in the city for early learning programs, particularly as those spaces that can be a real hub for connecting caregivers, connecting services. And a lot of those issues are around compliance, registration, and these are key barriers to accessing the subsidy that allows more and more children to access opportunities to early learning, which sets them up on a trajectory. And a lot of the work that the task force is doing is around thinking about rezoning, land use, thinking about how do we support with building plans, etc. Could you speak a little bit to what are the practical pieces of work that you're doing in collaboration with various other players in the city, acknowledging that the city can't be everywhere and do everything, but what does that look like for you?
I think also I just want to dovetail the response early on, is that if you look at mapping those services, and in government, you have to understand the problem statement. What is the context that you're trying to respond to? And what we've seen with the operators in the city of Cape Town, of the 2,620 educators in the city, there are approximately 63 to 65% of them that are not compliant. So what do? We engaged. We will ask them, well, why are you not compliant? What barriers are you facing? And the first thing that they've mentioned to us, well, we've built unlawfully. So there's a admin penalty that you will ask us to pay before you consider our building plan. And then, by the way, the zoning of the property does not, I will never be compliant because I need to submit a land use application. And if I overcome that particular hurdle, you would also ask me to pay what we call a development charge, to connect to the city services. And so having a clear understanding of what the issues are, we then said, well, let's look at those areas across the city. And we've exempted them. We said, if you are in these areas that are socially vulnerable, you won't need to pay an admin penalty. So why is that important? It is important because now you can submit your building plan because you don't have the money to pay for the admin penalty, right? But I also don't have as an operator now, I don't have the money to pay for an architect or getting sort of planning support advice. And so having the clarity that I spoke about earlier, and we've established a local planning support office that engages with the sector saying, hold on, do you know what a building envelope is? Do you know what a setback is? Do you know what we categorize as a small scale ECD or a large scale ECD? And so we have those conversations. And then what we've done is, we've actually then established a fund and put some seed funding there, approximately 8 million rand. And when you can submit to the fund to offset the DC cost that you may have. A very recent example, the application for about 180,000 rand in Educare out in Grassy Park, who we've assisted. And so those were the barriers. And the outcome that we want to achieve was to ensure that children are educated in a safe environment, but it has to be a fully compliant environment. And for the operators to understand, it's not our intention to close you down. What it is, our intention is to ensure that you are fully aware of what the compliance process looks like, what the fire and safety department, what they look at when they assess, environmental health practitioners, what they look at, the development management department in terms of land use and building plan development, that you are aware that the jargon that we often use, the language is accessible, and the tone, of course, is a tone that you understand what we're trying to communicate. So we've identified those barriers and we've removed those barriers, but also triggered legislative reform. So the zoning scheme, and if you've attended any of the 3 Indabas we've convened over the past 2 years, you would know that now you have additional use right within a residential zone 1 and R2 property. So if you have less than 34 children, you won't need a land use application. You just need permission from your neighbors and then you are good to go. So there are quite a few barriers. Those are the 4 important ones that we've identified engaging with the sector, and we've removed those barriers. And hopefully over the next 5 years, once we conclude the first phase of this program, we will then have a lot less, those 63% of the operators, a lot more of them become fully compliant and most importantly, can access the subsidy that national and provincial government have for them. So we are the regulator and we've done what we could to remove those barriers. And we've seen really some green shoots coming out of that process now.
So regulations and subsidy are one part of the equation for early learning programs. Kwanda, I want to bring you into the conversation because you've worked with numerous early learning programs across the country. And we know that funding isn't just one piece that unlocks it. We know that regulations land very differently in very different contexts. Could you maybe add to what are the other pieces? So if we unlock the regulatory piece, so what Eddie's speaking to, what are the other things that we need to get right, particularly at a city level?
Well, look, I think the regulation part is a very big part because those subsidies, they make those ECDs sustainable small to medium enterprises. So that's a very important part, and I don't want to de-emphasize it in any way. It's a lever that we definitely have to pull. But I would say the other parts, and you'll hear this a lot when you talk to ECD practitioners on the ground, is parents. Okay. We don't want the work that is happening within ECD centers to not be complemented by work that could be happening at home by the parents. The parent is the child's first teacher. So we need to even change the mindsets of parents that don't understand that actually a child's brain is most plastic in the early years and that they actually need to do the work within the home, preparing the child just to go to the ECD center first. So things like serve and return and that's just a technical term for a parent engaging a child intentionally. So when a child is interested in something, you then prompt them, and then whatever they're interested in following your prompt, you then prompt them again. So you have this almost like tennis effect, and that creates the brain for the child. You know, when David earlier on was talking about brain power, that's one of the mechanisms that a parent has at hand that they can use in the home. So I think that that's a big lever that we have not pulled yet. So engaging parents, and that's why we talk about an ecosystems approach when we talk about early childhood development in the program. So that's one thing. And then I would say those communal spaces that we talk about in the project, because ultimately, I mean, think of somebody, say, a Philippe or somewhere that live in a shack. They need a dwelling, not a dwelling area, but an area outside of that where they can kind of relax with their children and with their families, and feel safe, and where the temperature can be bearable, so to speak, because you can imagine what summer's like when you're living in a zinc shack. So an ecosystems approach is certainly what we have to do. And I'll tap back onto what I said earlier around institutions, because it's not enough that only municipalities put children at the center. Everybody must put children at the center. I would love to see the National Development Plan put children at the center of South Africa, because then in that way, all institutions involved can put children at the center. And then there's no one institution that is kind of, how can I say, discounting or circumventing, putting children at the center, because it does have to be something that happens in unison. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but I think it takes a city to raise a child in our case.
Thanks. Brett, I want to bring you back into the conversation, because I'm hearing a lot of positive threads, collaboration, bringing caregivers in, regulations, institutions, strengthening those. Earlier, you spoke about how this isn't a simple story. There's a lot of complexity here. And I want to focus maybe on one or two issues, particularly what you mentioned earlier, hunger and housing. These are big challenges in our city. Not wanting to simplify it, but what are some of the levers that we're not pulling on to unlock that as a very real opportunity to change the experiences of families and children?
Well, I mean, we've heard a lot of interventions, and what worries me is that some of these interventions are acupuncture points. The ECD here that becomes regulated, the institutions that are helping as NGOs as an act of charity. And I think in mentioning these opportunities.
Brett, maybe let's hold on for a second. Let me get you a mic. We lost. Thanks, Rahima. There you go.
So this would seem okay.
Hold on. Let's see. I think we need to turn it on. It should be working. Hello, hello. I think that is.
Yeah, I was talking about some of the responses around the regulations for ECD, the NGOs. I mean, these are like acupuncture points that we're putting into a very, very complicated and well-established structural problem. And the fact that there are NGOs doing great work is fabulous, but it's not. We must be careful about being seduced by the optics of stuff happening because NGOs are available. There is a role that the state has to play.
Exactly.
And the state must take responsibility for ensuring that children are safe, that they are growing up in a dignified environment, that they have access to decent schools, that they have food, that their caregivers have access to basic income. And so it is not as simple as just saying we went to a horse, no disrespect to the child commissioner, and there is a lot of organizations handing out pamphlets. It's not as simple as let's just get the ECD sorted out. We have to fundamentally change the way our society was developed over centuries, and we have to include children and families in the future of our city. They have a right to the city, and they have a right to play, children. And their right to play is being undermined by the fact that their communities have not been developed to a place that it's safe to play. And we need to be more angry.
Yeah.
We're being very nice and we're keeping the tone very even. We need to be more angry about the way in which people live. And the way in which people live affects the way children are living. And no child will have a pathway to success, to development, to realize their potential, to realize their opportunities without us addressing this systemic problem that we have not addressed the apartheid spatial plan that relegates some children to broken communities in the built environment space. So the opportunities in the institutional area, and I think I may even have forgotten your question, the opportunities and the responsibilities of the state, national, provincial, and city, is to address those communities who have the greatest need first. We need a convergence of services and infrastructure in those communities that need it first. And what we have is a city and an administration, not only the city, who say, we're trying to provide services equally. No, there are communities who need services and infrastructure more. My play parks in my neighborhood do not need the level of maintenance that the play parks in some communities have. That don't have. We even paint you spoke about the speed humps. The speed humps in my neighborhood are beautifully painted every single year. Every single year. But I can go to any township in Cape Town and you can't even see the speed humps because they're not painted.
Oh, they're not there?
They're not there. So it is about time that we looked at the communities that are in greatest need and converge our services, our investment, and our infrastructure to address them one by one, because clearly we can't do it all at once. But the spreading thin of our funding and our focus and our services and our infrastructure is not actually lifting anybody out of the conditions in which they've grown and which they've been stuck in for decades. So what was your question? But that was
you're on track. You're on track.
It's just, we must be careful about being seduced by all the good work that has been done, which is just acupuncture. It is not fundamentally changing those communities. And unless we are fearless and saying we are going to converge housing, transport, water and sanitation, education, sports and recreation in this community because it needs it the most first. Let's get it right here and then we'll move on. We have to do that because we are leaving people behind in a major way. And as the CEO said earlier, their future depends on us doing the right things now.
I want to stay with you, Brett, because you've been on the other side, right? Working in government, trying to figure out these big problems and how they land in place. What are we missing then? If we can't converge all of these services, health, education, access, whatever it may be, what are we not getting right?
There are a number of things we're not getting right. And I think the starting point was raised earlier when I think Sarah said, departments and organizations work in silos, or departments and governments work in silos. And so the sports department will focus on this sports field in Delft. But the housing department is not focusing on the housing in Delft. And the education department is not focusing on the education in Delft. So we've put a sports field in an area that is basically a poverty trap with 7,000 free basic housing, BNG housing. I mean, Delft is basically a poverty trap. 7,000 free basic houses have been developed in Delft, inadequate schooling, inadequate recreational facilities, no parks that are decent to play in. In fact, a park where a child was playing on a piece of equipment, the equipment broke off its access due to lack of service, and this play equipment killed a 7-year-old boy in Delft. So we are not converging our planning in a way where we are overcoming the silos that departments think, I'm going to be responsible for education and I'm building a school in Blue Downs because that's where I have a piece of land. But the greatest need for schooling right now is in Delft. And that is the problem. And there was actually a solution that National Treasury introduced called the BEP, the Built Environments Performance Plan. But they've done away with it, and it's unfortunate. But it required national, provincial, local governments, city governments, not local governments, only cities. So national, provincial, and city, and state-owned entities to converge and say, this is where we're going to plan to spend our money. And only then did you get your conditional grants in order to make sure that we were pooling our resources in areas that needed it the most. And it's unfortunate that this BEP has fallen away, or the Built Environment Performance Plan, because it was one step towards holding each other accountable for spending in the right areas.
Thanks. I think you can keep that mic until maybe once your mic is also working, but for now, hold on to it. Eddie, I want to bring you back into the conversation. This feels like a critical time to talk about leadership. This piece around converging of services, it requires the political will, requires commitment, and there's evidence that we can do it. What are the pieces that we're not getting right? I'm not quite hearing this.
So I think, Brett, we are angry. We are angry, and I appreciate your sentiment purely because we, as a whole of society, we need to be angry as a collective. What we see currently in our community is the fact that safety is compromised. And so let's talk about why safety is compromised. Safety is compromised because we're not able to secure a successful conviction of individuals. That is the greatest deterrent to any of this antisocial behavior that you find in our communities. And that is why, and of course you would know, we've been advocating for the devolution of certain functions, saying, can we assist to ensure that our communities are a lot safer? One of the primary reasons why we've, over the past 4.5 years, employed approximately 1,600 law enforcement officers. And on the other side, SAP's, their staff complement has reduced over the same period for sort of a smaller amount. But I think what we also need to be mindful of, and yeah, I completely agree with the sentiment that Brett and Sarah raised in terms of the silo approach. And I sort of, the spatial planners will argue that the point that Brett made in terms of the BEP, that the spatial vision for the city should compel all of those departments to crowd investment into a particular community. Has it happened? No. Why? Because of the silo approach. So what we've done now is we've said, looking at all of these nodes where we have, in terms of safety as an issue, where we're gang-infested areas, how do we then crowd in support there in terms of investment? And what do we need to consider to compel departments to invest there, whether it's infrastructure investment or whether it's other soft skills intervention we are proposing to invest in? And so what we've done is now we've put together a precinct planning and management software saying, this document you have to comply with. And by the way, when you ask for budget, and if it does not speak directly to those areas, go back to the drawing board. Because if we don't crowd in investment in those areas, then we have failed those communities. And Brett is absolutely right that we will never have sufficient resources to respond to every single need in the city of Cape Town. But I think it's also important to note that where I completely agree with Brett again, and I think it won't be the last time, Brett. I agree with you in terms of the budget. The budget would be sort of a strong indicator where you're spending your money. So 73% of the budget is going directed specifically at those areas that Brett spoke about, focusing on what? Housing, water and sanitation, roads infrastructure, looking at mobility between those communities. And it's important investment. Even if you look at on the Cape Flats as well, we spend one of our biggest capital programs of 1.2 billion rand for sewer connection. Because we know if you don't have the investment infrastructure, what would happen? You have sewer spills in those areas. And of course, the infrastructure is aging. So, Kentse, to answer your question in one sentence, is to compel the departments to crowd investment, to understand the context, and to sort of just ensure that you sustain traction on those interventions. Because if you don't do that, you'll be complicit to sustain what currently is happening. But let's also talk about transforming our communities. What does that look like? We've not subscribed to a definition here this evening, right? But if you look at what I spoke about earlier on, and Sarah also spoke about it, that in some parts of the city, you'd have to get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock to be in time for work. Does everyone have 24 hours in the day to do what they need to do? And if not, how do we unlock investment in those communities to ensure that the economic activity is closer to the residential opportunity? Or take the residential opportunity close to the economic opportunity? And you could possibly argue, is that only the CBD of town? But what happens on the issue of affordability? If you take me out of the Cape Flats and the townships and you give me an affordable housing opportunity, what's the total cost of living? Can I go down to the corner shop and buy a half a loaf of bread? Can I buy my 2 tea bags? Can I buy my one nappy, my two sanitary towels? What's Educare? What does Educare cost me now in Khayelitsha? I pay approximately 280 Rand per month. Now you're asking me to pay what, 5,000-6,000 Rand in the CBD of town. So we need to understand that context as well. So I think we agree that it's complex. It is absolutely complex, but it's equally important that we as responsible stakeholders, as a collective, that we don't lose sight of that context, because the moment we do, we then become complicit. And in order to address the spatial inequalities of apartheid, it's not a sprint, but what's the plan to do that? And I think that's the most important question. And how do we compel the departments across all spheres of government to crowd in support, so that the indicator at the end of the day would be a safer community? You can look at SAPS indicators. You can also look at, in terms of the ECD context, that more of them are compliant. You can also see the economic indicators in terms of unemployment stats, that it's sort of reduced over time, but it's complex. And I think we should never lose sight and be desensitized to those certain contexts, but rather forge ahead to make inroads into those communities.
So I'm a child living in Cape Town, and I hear your argument around the complexity and the reality, and this is a long road. But let's get pragmatic. In the next 5 years, what's the picture that you're painting for children in Cape Town?
Sure. I'm going to zoom into the ECD space. I think that's the most important program that we have to focus on, particularly if you look at the matric outcomes. Every single year, we celebrate the matric outcomes. But are we locating interventions at the early childhood phase in terms of what are we doing there? Creating a space where they can be educated safely, that the operator is fully compliant, that the broader community, the public open spaces are well lit, that the streets are, in terms of repaired, in terms of potholes or whatever you find there, that the sewer spills are reduced over time. And we have the data to respond to that. But that's the outcome in 5 years' time, that we have more compliant ECDs from a child's perspective. And that is important, not just in terms of from an educational perspective, but equally important from a trauma, reducing trauma that the child is exposed to. Because we contribute towards development of a young person. Over time, the skill that he or she has been taught in the foundational phase will definitely stand not just that individual in good stead, but the family structure, the broader community, and then ultimately the broader picture in terms of that rainbow nation that we often read about and not often contribute towards.
Let's stay with the thread of data. I want to bring you back into the conversation, Sarah, because one of the key aspects for the commissioner is monitoring and also reporting on some of the data around children. Can you talk specifically to what you're seeing in the Western Cape, but also maybe from a municipal perspective? And how's that endeavor impacting, or perhaps how are you reporting on some of that data? How are children engaging with it, but also caregivers?
Yeah, obviously the children engaging is one of the most important things we get our data or information. I usually say a child, behind every data is a heartbeat. So we should never just talk about data. It's a child, it's a person living. So with our child right workshops, we get that information from children. But we also realize that the caregiver, we must also hear from them. Because sometimes things like not getting a birth certificate, not getting an ID, the child may not know about the struggle. So we have to have these conversations with caregivers, with guardians, with parents, to see what they struggle with. So, but I also want to, what Brent now said about the development is so important. I wish that in 5 years from now, we could have a policy that every single municipality, local government must first have a child impact assessment on every single planning or zoning, what they do, and ask the question, okay, this is now the plan. What is the effect on a child? And not, like you say, because that really happens. We built.
That's the precinct plan.
Yeah, we built where there's a space. But look at assessment first, but make it compulsory for every municipality. Get the input from the community, from the child, from the caregiver, and then decide. Something that it was actually also scary to, when we got the information. I mean, I knew that working in courts. The liquor I mean, we all know there's not supposed to be a liquor store or an outlet near a school or near that. But if you drive through our communities, I mean, every second house is sells liquor. And my question is just, do we look, local government or the areas, do they look at that? Do they really go? And because these places are not unknown. I usually said, when you read you call it an affidavit, the A1. Now, the A1 is the first witness on any scene. They are A1. I tell my husband, we never stop at a car accident. I never want to be A1. So A1, but if a policeman has a sting operation, they are A1. And the affidavit usually read, we sat and he walked out of a well-known drug house. So I said, okay, it's a well-known drug house. But tomorrow morning, it's still going to be a well-known drug house because nothing is done. So the child assessment plan to see where a school should be, where housing should be, where parks should be, not only if we have space, but that is also, you have to have parents and caregivers input in that, because children don't necessarily know that. So you have to talk to communities. You can't decide. If you don't live in a community, you don't know the living reality of that community.
Kwanda, yes,
Can I
come
just
in.
double tap on
Sure.
that? Is my mic on? Okay.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to, because I think what you're saying, Sarah, it also aligns to me to a point I wanted to say to Brett, is that I think South Africa, we're such a polarized country. We know that, right? Because you've got capital, rich people, white people with the money. Then you've got generations of trauma built up in the people that are living today on the other side of that. And we're supposed to have consensus together and formulate a plan for a country. And so you're saying, undo the history. That should be our plan. But I think that that's a very difficult thing to do. And I realize that you're right, and we should be more angry. But I feel to get consensus, we perhaps need to have a beneficiary of a plan that we can say, when we all speak and we have a plan and we don't want to work in silos, who's the one beneficiary we can all agree on? Whether you are living in Bishops and you're rich, or you're living in Delft, from a human level, who can you empathize with as the primary beneficiary? And that's the child. Right? That's the child. So all of us can empathize with the child. Advertisers use it, everybody uses it. It's a natural thing within humans to empathize for the child. So perhaps if we were really intentional about our national development plan, actually putting children at the center, maybe that helps us form consensus as a country, as polarized as we are, to make development an agenda for the child. And I think that policy says, Brett, I can see a little bit of skepticism on your face. Policy says that if you focus on the child as the primary beneficiary of your policies, you actually, as a ripple effect, you will also support others in the community, so not just the child.
You can respond.
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing, and I'm not skeptical. I mean, there's this wonderful organization, and I'm sure that Douglas Murray Trust is aware of it, called Urban 95.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know about Urban 95, the 95 is 95 centimeters. So it's an organization operates out of Netherlands, done great work around the world, which basically encourages city leaders to plan your city for a 3-year-old child, because a 3-year-old child is supposed to be about 95 centimeters tall. So that's why it's called Urban 95. And if you plan your city for a 3-year-old child, you plan it for everybody. And then, so I'm not skeptical. I'm just pull faces about the National Development Plan because its term is nearly up and nothing has actually been implemented.
Exactly right.
So I don't want to rely on the National Development Plan for the solution. But the idea that that we can't address the structure of our spaces, I don't accept that we can't address the structure of our spaces. I do accept that we won't find consensus. But there's no society in the world that will find consensus. We need leadership, not consensus.
Okay.
We need people who have a vision and are going to pursue that vision, and they're going to encourage those people who are skeptical to come along on the journey, because it's important for children, and particularly maybe it's important for 3-year-olds, because they definitely don't have a voice. They don't go to youth councils and things like that. They're the voiceless. So let's plan our city for a 3-year-old child. And we're not going to find consensus ever, but we'll have leadership, we'll be fearless, and we'll bring people along.
Okay. Happy with that. Happy with that.
I'm seeing that I'm getting questions from some of the audience online, so I'm going to integrate them into some of my questions. And this is from Bradley Smith, who's saying, everybody's saying all the right things, but what's missing is the role of civil society and NGOs in our communities and community-based organizations. And what's coming through quite strongly is the fact that we're not funding a lot of these civil society organizations to enable them to do the work that they need to do. Earlier, you spoke about the institutions that we need to shift. How do you see civil society supporting a lot of what Kwanda's speaking to, what Sarah's speaking to, as well as some of what Eddie was sharing?
Far worse conditions of space if it was not for civil society in every respect. I mean, civil society have championed Chapter 2 of our Constitution, which is our Bill of Rights, to the extent where they've dragged government to court over and over and over again to assert the rights that we all have. And it astounds me that we have a government that has that fought against the atrocities of apartheid, put in place this amazing constitution with a Bill of Rights. Chapter 2 is a Bill of Rights, and that Bill of Rights should be a manifesto for everybody. And if it was not for civil society, many of the rights that we have today would not be realized by government. So absolutely we need civil society. But the point that I made earlier about civil society and institutionalizing programs is that government is relying on civil society and NGO to do their work.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. So we cannot have civil society feeding children because they're hungry. Government must make sure that that happens, because it says so in the Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights that no one will be hungry in this country. So we can't be relying on the charities and the NGOs and civil society to do the work of government when it is very clear what is the work of government. So yes, civil society has been amazing. They've dragged South Africa to some amazing victories against government ineptitude, lack of interest. But I think that the role still is for government to do government's job, and government's job is set out in Chapter 2 of our Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, and they must be working on that every single day. Those of us who are elected need to make sure that government is implementing Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights every single day.
Thank you. Eddie, maybe to come back to you, because safety and security is coming through quite strongly as a theme. And you were mentioning earlier some of the interventions, particularly those focused on young people and children. But one of the pieces that's coming through as a theme is to say that we're not doing enough, particularly in those communities that we're leaving behind. Can you speak a little bit to what's the track record been, but also similarly to the reflection earlier to say, if we're thinking about building a different society and bringing families along, bringing children along, what are the 2 things that we get right?
So I think we must acknowledge that enforcement comes at the back end of a process that has gone horribly wrong. You only respond because there was a decision that was made, and now the law has to respond to a particular context. And we've seen that the conviction rate has not been the best. It's been really poor, to be quite honest about that. And it's not seen as a deterrent to reduce the need to conduct oneself unlawfully. But if we ask the question, what is the alternative? How do you say to someone that there's the instant gratification that you can get from being part of a gang and conducting yourself unlawfully, and you may just lose your life, and saying here's a healthy alternative that if you focus on this, if you use and access the resources that are available to you, this is what your future could look like. I think that is where government should focus a lot more on. And here I argue that we have to work collaboratively with civil society. You have to work collaboratively with corporate South Africa, because government cannot do it by itself. And if we don't work collaboratively, then of course we won't achieve those particular outcomes. And then that pathway that we speak about towards a healthy alternative will not be there. And then ultimately, they will end up in prison. Ultimately, they find themselves in a very difficult place where they shouldn't be. So I think for me, if you focus all the resources on the whole of society approach, most certainly that's a very difficult conversation to have, but it's a very important conversation to have. We've invested heavily in safety, and I think I've said that early on in terms of the amount of officers, and I can talk about the technologies as well, but the question has to be asked, are communities safer? And if not, why not? And because safety is also a perception, right? What is the perception of those individuals within those communities as well? And I think we have a lot more to do, but focusing on the whole of society would and should be a priority for government collaboratively.
I might come back to that because there's more questions popping up around safety and security, but I want to pull on this thread of the whole of society approach, because I think, Kwanda, a lot of the work that you're leading sits at this intersection of, I'm going to come to the audience. I see the hands. I'm coming. There's this conversation around the role, not just of government, civil society, but also the private sector. How do these come together to land in place with some of the initiatives that you're thinking of and what you're seeing, particularly in the city?
Well, I mean, look, I'll speak perhaps to our project to just speak to an example of that. So part of our project is establishing what we're calling an enabling fund. And this enabling fund is supposed to almost work the same way as, if you remember, during COVID, we had a solidarity fund. And then this solidarity fund was really around how do we react more flexibly to the issues that are arising due to COVID, because they were different and they were coming in fast, thick and fast. And so the idea is that this enabling fund becomes a fund that can support early childhood development at the grassroots. So, but more flexible around what that could look like. So whatever the sites need, whatever the families need, whatever those communities need. And it also becomes a way in which you can funnel people that want to support early childhood development. Often when I see organizations, they may say, particular organizations in Cape Town, they'll say, oh, we've got tourists that have come to visit our organizations and they want to support an ECD site. But all of that is happening in fragmented little spaces. Imagine if you could funnel all of that money into one space where everybody can tap into it and be able to sustain their organizations even further from that. Now, if you think, if we get it right, Alderman, by the next 5 years, you've got the subsidy coming in, and you've got these extra funds where you can have even added value in terms of the services that you're providing to your children, then I think, we've got a sustainable approach if we do something like that, and that's bringing everybody in, right? So that's bringing the networks of organizations that are working perhaps with tourists and other people, or networks of philanthropic organizations that want to support ECD. So all of these funds go into one pot. You're bringing in the early childhood development centers themselves because they're tapping into that to then make better experiences for children. And you're also obviously tapping into those communities that'll benefit from that as well. So you've got this collaboration happening on all fronts, and hopefully, obviously, private industry also to come in and make that fund a real thing, because what we're thinking about is companies that are in these communities, they are interested or invested in the betterment of these communities. That's where their customers come from. That's also where their staff may come from. And so if they are also tapping into that fund, whether it's through CSI or other mechanisms, then we might have a really viable thing. And you know what? Not just money, human resources, time, those are all things that you can put into the enabling fund or a structure like that.
Can I just further comment on that? I think just to contextualize the comment that Kwanda made. So many of you, I see quite a few familiar faces in the room, but the program that Kwanda is referring to is that as a city, we've received some grant funding from the German Development Bank. And of course, that will be approximately 300 million rand. We were looking at the operator, how do we capacitate the operator to be fully compliant, the principles that I spoke about earlier. How do we ensure that the structure, the center itself is up to code so that they can actually get an approved building plan, and then of course access the subsidy, because you would require an approved building plan to move from bronze, silver, and ultimately gold. And having a broader perspective on the community itself. What would a sustainable community look like in that context? And then ultimately the outcome that we want to achieve, that 63% that I spoke about early on, that number is reduced. What's exciting about this particular program, the Enabling Fund, we're now able to crowd in private sector investment to further assist and ensure that it becomes a lot more sustainable. And when a program like this is external to the city, you have the necessary agility that you would require to respond to particular context. We have all the bureaucracy, which we should comply with, the Municipal Financial Management Act and all this other legislation. But if it's external, of course, we don't have to comply. We do have to comply to financial principles, but the agility is there. We don't have to comply to our long, tedious internal supply chain management process as well. So that's a very important program. And that's the program that will achieve the outcome when you ask me, what does the future look like in 5 years' time for kids? It's that program that's going to assist us achieve a particular outcome that I spoke about early on.
Okay. Thanks, Eddie. I'm going to turn back to the audience now, and I'm already seeing hands. So I'm just looking at the team for mics. I'm going to take, let's do 5 questions at a round, in one round. Are we going to start at the back? Okay, great. Colleague, Chloe.
Hi, thanks. So I really appreciate the panel discussion. I just want to build on some of the points that have been raised. So there's a long list of challenges from food insecurity to education, parks. There's also the need to crowd in investment and also transform our communities and the whole of society approach. So building on that, but also like looking at pragmatism and real solutions. What is the role that public employment programs can play in the city of Cape? Opportunities and sustainable livelihoods for young people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Who's next, Cornet? I'm
That's the
seeing.
program.
Let me take 5 questions and then I'll come back. But yes, the public employment program. We'll see if we can merge some of them.
You can point them out and then I'll give.
Okay, great. There was a lady in front who was first. There we go. Let me hijack your mic, Brett. This might be easier.
Hello, everybody. And my name is Marguerite. I'm the director of the Trauma Center. But in my previous life, I worked for local government in Swartland. And from my experience there, I mean, we know the objects of local government is to promote social and economic development. But how would we do that? And I think local government is particularly well placed administratively to coordinate, to get people together, to work together. And the only problem with that is often you get everybody together, they talk and they frustrate each other. But why not? What we've done at Swartland is what we gave like a collaborative seed fund for child organizations to work together over the winter months when there's no seasonal work. And in Cape Town as well, the tourism industry is down. There's no seasonal work. Children are hungry. They're not in school. In school, they get food. Over holidays, there's no food.
Yeah.
Get all the organizations to work together over the winter time and learn to work together. Because to sit and talk and work together, that never works. You get frustrated, you get irritated. No, I'm not going to that meeting. I'm wasting my time. Let's learn to work together. And just a simple thing in every ward. We have a nice holiday program. And then the local government don't even have to give so much money. It's just a seed fund. So Trauma Center will come. We will do our program. We already funded for that. SAPs will come with their social crime. They'll do their bit and do their dogs and all the things they do. And it becomes something that is not as feasible to be done. And then I have a passion. I would like us to have a social worker in every ward. According to the Children's Act. Children, according to the Children's Act, municipalities can appoint social workers. Imagine, I always say to the engineers at Swartland, there's no use you have a road and you have blood on that road. There's no use you have a stormwater and there's a corpse in that stormwater. There's no use to have that. We have to develop our people. We have to do that. And then, just by example, I have a very soft spot for Wallace Dean. My godchildren stay there. And earlier this year, actually earlier last year, they said suddenly the crime went up the top in Marguerite. We can't walk anymore. The crime is so high. And I asked, what happened? He said, Marguerite, we had a sports field there where we used to play. And then they built a school there. Now we have nowhere to play. Now the children are in gangs. And my youngest godchild, I had to remove him out of that place. He was almost killed by vigilantes. His friend was beheaded. A child. People, we must do better, really.
Thank you. There's a hand there, the lady in the maroon. Can you please stand so that Rahima can see you? Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I'm Karima Jacobs.
Karima.
I'm the chairperson of South African Congress for Early Childhood Development in the Western Cape. This question goes to Brett specifically.
Okay.
You spoke about the communities that need help, and you said that we need to choose the communities that needs the most help. What kind of criteria can be used? Because we are in such a mess right now. And I specifically can't say only urban, but rural as well. How do we choose a community that needs help?
Thank you.
Sure.
There's a hand there. Thank you.
My name's Brian Siegel,
Hi,
and
Brian.
I'm with an organization called Thrive. And one of the things that I'm wanting to ask is about emotional health. We realize that trauma is intergenerational, and we realize that my child gets my trauma. You spoke about us being a very traumatized society from apartheid.
Yeah.
What is government doing to deal with the emotional scarring that I am passing on to my child, who then passes on to their child? And how do we bring that equation of the emotions also into the solution of realizing that it is those first few years is based on my experience of my first few years.
Yeah.
And so we really need to bring, in your address, you talk about health and food and everything else like that. When are we going to widen the conversation to say that emotional regulation, how I regulate my emotions, how I calm myself when I'm triggered, that I can regulate myself down into a conversation as opposed into a shouting match,
Yeah.
is really, really important.
Thank you. One more question. We'll have another round. So I see the hands that have gone up.
Okay, mine's probably more for the deputy mayor. The ISS, the Institute for Security Studies, released a study that said for every R1 invested in crime prevention, it saves 3 to 10 Rand down the road in other aspects, so healthcare, education, those sorts of aspects. We see a safety budget that is massive, one of the biggest ones we've ever seen, like 6.3 billion. That is quite heavily focused on policing and not necessarily on prevention. Why? And then on top of that, as a secondary question, I suppose, within the current budget, there is 1 billion Rand allocated to streetlights. That would roughly build 40,000 new streetlights, not even fixing the current ones we have. And then on top of that, to fix all the potholes currently, it would cost 52.5 million Rand, roughly, in Cape Town. Those potholes have been around for many years. Streetlights, people have been asking for streetlights to be erected for like 5-6 years now. We have these budgets every single year. Why are we asking for the same streetlights in the same places and the budget is still there?
Okay.
Like we've done the maths.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to pause there, but I'm going to come back to the audience because we've got 5 questions. And Eddie, let me start with you. I think I'm going to combine the 2 questions because I think there was a question on public employment programs and what does that look like with the conversation that we've been having, particularly for young people. And then I want to come back to this issue of safety and crime because I think it also came from the online audience as well. So I'm not going to rephrase the question, but I want to connect it to the conversation around social workers in terms of where are they?
The PEP program, again, you apply to a program that for funding that's not within your budget. So you apply to national government, of course, then you get the funding. There's an element of risk there because we've seen that even though you have the best intention of the program, often the rug is pulled out from underneath you. And you've committed to deliver a particular service in a community and then the funding is withdrawn. You can definitely apply and you can have impact, but I would rather ask the question, how do we ensure that we sort of grow our own timber to ensure that we have funding available for those programs, especially the youth skills development programs in those areas as well. And here I go back to the whole of society and looking at the precinct plan and understanding that context and how do we develop a plan just for that particular community. And the precincts that we've identified, to Ms. Jacobs' point, I know you haven't asked me to respond to that, but we have to consider communities that are socially vulnerable. What do we mean by socially vulnerable? We look at the density of that particular community. You're looking at the limited access to services. You're looking at unemployment levels and lack of infrastructure investment. That's where you start. And that's what we're doing now with the KFW program as well. We were saying we're looking at those communities and prioritizing those communities to respond to that particular context. So yes, you can apply to all the external funds for programs, but there's a risk associated with that. But rather ask the question, how do you create a framework where you can crowd in support, whether it's enabling fund or other, to fund your own programs that you have in the city, and immediately mitigate the risk of the funding to be withdrawn for a particular program.
Okay. And I think the second question was around budgets and why are we paying for the same potholes and streetlights?
Yeah, there needs to be context. You need to give me an area, because if you look at potholes, you would often find there's a pothole because, aging infrastructure and they repaired it. And often when it's in winter period, they make safe. What is a concern to us at the moment would be road reinstatements. What triggers a road reinstatement is if there's a water pipe burst, and then of course the water and sanitation department would have to reinstate the road, and there's a massive delay. Delays as long as currently we've cut it down to 7 months. And the reason why there are currently these delays is because there's been a shift from the roads department that initially was responsible to reinstate the roads, and they've now told the water and sanitation department, it's your infrastructure that caused damage to the road infrastructure, you must fix it. In theory, it sounds okay. But what has happened that particular department didn't have the necessary tenders in place, the skills to do that. They now have it in place and they're working away the backlog. So we're not investing in streetlights just in one area, it's across the city. And it's complex. If you look at the city's infrastructure, this is the roads infrastructure and the gullies combined, it's about 16,500 kilometers from here to the UK and then 3,000 kilometers back. If you look at the sewer infrastructure network, it's just over 9,500 kilometers. It is a lot. Electricity cabling, also close to 11,000 kilometers. You can check all the way across the continent. So the budget is not just for every single area, but of course, where we have the pressures, we're responding to those particular pressures, not just from repairs and maintenance perspective, but also new infrastructure invested in those areas that we've identified as per the Directorate's sector plan. So those assessments are being done, and of course the budgets are informed by those sector plans as well. So if there's a particular context, like in a given area, I'd happily look at that and we can see what has transpired there. But it was just a general remark.
Let's pause because we have a whole bunch of other
Yeah, you can
questions.
give it to me. I'm more than happy to look at it.
I want to speak to the intergenerational trauma, but something else that also came up from the online audience is the social workers and where are they? And I want to connect that to what you brought up earlier, just around alcohol harms, gender-based violence, because I think these are all connected to intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, the gentleman from Thrive, you know how we should start dealing not with the children, but with the parents.
Thank you.
Because we are all traumatized somehow, and now we have to raise children.
Thank you.
But we have not worked through our trauma, and so that's really, I think, a passion of mine as well, to say, let's start working, and especially with men. We are so often talk to the girl child this, the girl child that. But do we talk to the boy child? Because we think his trauma or what he experienced, man up. And we forget that this child, I usually make the example, I also worked very long in Wallisdean. So Wallisdean, actually, it's gang-ridden. So my concern, in 10 years' time, we're going to have 25-year-old men that cannot read and write, that did not go to school, that are, well, if they're not dead by that time from gangs, most of them will be in Paulsmoor, but they will all have children. And that's that vicious circle. So we have to start with parents, with adults, start healing. How? Because the problem there is also it's a personal choice. A court order, for instance, if you have a divorce or you have parenting plan, you fight on children, a court can order that type of trauma counseling. Then you have to adhere. But what if you do not have to adhere? So we have to change the narrative. It's okay not to be okay. And it's okay to say I'm not okay. So that's a big issue. If we can solve that, our children would be happier. Then the social workers. Oh, yeah. There are municipalities that have a social worker. They work with social workers. I don't exactly know what they call. They've got a social program or that's employed by the municipality. But that is something we have to get funding for more social workers. Like Red said, that is government's responsibility. So, and there are many, I think vacant posts that are not being filled. There are social workers that are at home, that are fully qualified. They can't get a job, but the need is there. So, but that again now comes from funding. That terrible word, funding. Finances. But I think local government should take responsibility. And as city, the city has clinics that they are responsible for. Why can't they have child protection organizations that they are responsible for? I know it's going to be a gray area in if you look at Children's Act, not necessarily, because the Children's Act says that a social worker working either for government or local government or municipality can remove a child. So that might be a solution. Get local government or local municipalities to also have child protection organizations.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Counseling.
Brett, I'm going to come to you. The question of prioritization. How do we do that?
Yeah. Is my mic working? Check my voice.
They're taking the mic away from you.
It's a stage voice.
Darcy.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's on. It's on.
All right. Thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question. Can I do something maybe a little risky first in answering it? Just to illustrate in a general way, the way I think you can start to prioritize and work out the criteria. If we were to take every human being, every person out of the city, just there's nobody, no child, no adult, it's just an empty city, and drive through it. Is there anybody in this room that would not be able to identify which area was a white suburb, was a colored suburb, was a black African black suburb? You can tell by the infrastructure, you can tell by the sidewalks, you can tell by the road quality, you can tell by the housing, obviously, you can tell by the parks, you can tell by the schools, you can tell by the sports facilities. So just in general, it shames me that there are white South Africans who have not done this. But when I say this often when I say to people, just take people out and just look at the environment that is around you and start there. And you can easily identify, first of all, where we need to prioritize for investment. But if I was to set out a set of criteria, I would list a couple of things. But I do want to make the point that this work was done in Cape Town in 2012, 2013, when academics at UCT, UWC, and University of Stellenbosch were asked to identify the most those suburbs or those communities that were in most need in order to prioritize some spending. It was in what was then introduced as the Mayoral Urban Regeneration Project. So where those projects were introduced was based on the study. But I mean, we could look at poverty and income levels. We could look at the urban development, as I said earlier. Just what is the development like in those communities? When you drive there, is there still stormwater on the lingering on the road surface because the stormwater system isn't working properly? Look at the housing. Is there enough housing? Or is there a housing deficit? Are people living in backyards? Are they living in informal settlements? Are they living in council rental stock, which is not well maintained? Look at the housing. Look at the amenities and the services. Are there children's parks? Are they well maintained? Are children actually able to use them safely? Look at the sports and recreation facilities. Are there sports and recreation facilities? When there are sports and recreation facilities, are they maintained by the city or are they outsourced to the community? Because the city has a policy called the Sports Asset Management Policy. And that policy partly places the obligation on a community to maintain their own sports facilities in their community.
Wow.
And some communities are not able to afford to do that. Are there social services? Are there schools? Are children being transported from where they live far, far away, as Sarah was saying earlier, because there's inadequate schooling? Are there clinics? Are there healthcare facilities? What is food security like in that community? Are children hungry? Are adults hungry? Eddie spoke about residential densities, and you have to look at those most densely populated parts of our city first. I mean, I have a beef with the city about residential densities, and I'm surprised he used it in the context of social vulnerability, because the city has adopted a policy to encourage those places that are most densely populated in terms of residential densities to increase their densities. So I don't understand a city that's linking residential densities with vulnerability, but at the same time is saying to households, if you own your property, you can build 8 to 12 flats on them, 20 square meters in size. So increase the residential densities where they already are. Doesn't make sense to me. And then let's have one standard. And I'll give you a little anecdote. When I was first appointed transport mayoral committee member, I was shocked to find that the city of Cape Town had a policy that for communities on the Cape Flats, you only get a sidewalk on one side of the road. That was the policy. I mean, it's unbelievable. So let's just say, let's have one standard for infrastructure, for parks, for amenities. Those communities that have that standard already will maintain it. Those communities who do not, those are the areas we start to invest in.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think you can hold on to that. There's a lady at the back who nearly fell out of her chair in the last round. So I'm going to start with her. Corné, if you could give her the mic.
Good evening, everybody.
And folks, I'm going to ask you to be straight to the point so that we can give as many people a chance to
I
ask
am
a
going
question.
to try so hard to be straight to the point. The city of Cape Town, between the period 2011 to 2018, had something called the ECD, Early Childhood and Social Development and Early Childhood Development. It was a directorate, not a department. It had 7 departments. Food security, where we built gardens and fed people. We had ECDs, where we built 8 centers of excellence. Those were independent, city-owned, built by the city. The task team that Eddie's talking about was established in 2012, 2013. We also had youth groups. We had vulnerable groups. We employed social workers. These things had already happened in the city. Why was it done away with? If we are having this conversation this evening, why have we removed the very essence, the very basis of what is required? I keep on hearing about LEAP. We don't need policing. We need social workers. We need the social workers to go in. Part of the Social Development Directorate, we employed 800 women of vulnerable children, taught them how to deal with their children, put them through programs such as Strengthening Families, showed them how to live with their families, how to interact. All of these programs have been done away with. Now, I want to know, why was it gotten rid of? I can't tell you why, but I'd like to get an answer from the panel. Okay. Then I need to understand, if we are aware of all the crime areas, because all the crime and drug areas are public housing areas, that is the responsibility of the city, not of SAPS. And we keep on hearing about SAPS, but it is the city's property. They know where the drug houses are. Why are they not dealing with that? Instead of talking to us as if we are not aware that these are crime areas. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lady in a white jacket right in the middle here, Corné. Yes, that's you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to speak as quickly as possible because I've got so much to say. But first of all, thank you this is so fascinating and interesting. Very different to what I expected. I'm Kim Conley, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of the Imoyo Foundation, nonprofit organization working in Hout Bay at grassroots level. And I totally agree with Mr. Thrive, Mr. Segal, I believe your name is. And that is also my area of corporate coaching emotional intelligence and communication, just to explain. So coming from a grassroots level, I've spent 11 years having conversations with the very children that you are talking about and the very families that you're talking about. And I feel like I've studied about 6 new degrees in the process. I like to absorb the information. What troubles me about the conversations is, Brett Herron, Mr. Herron, you said we're not angry enough. I am livid at everything, the situation, and I think that the solutions are not difficult. But what is the city doing about the fraud and corruption in the service deliveries? Why are we as the grassroots level doing the government's work? Why are we getting funded for a project, but we're only given 15% of the project's needs? How does that benefit? How we are literally being castrated because you want, and I'm saying city because I'm the one that writes out the proposals for various city funding opportunities. You want us to do work, you want us to report. I will jump through any hoop. My organization was awarded by DCAS as being the best community arts program in the Western Cape. But we can't pay our rent. We haven't paid our very tiny team for 2 months because of the restrictions on funding. Yet we are the ones increasing the matric pass rates, reducing the gang affiliations, reducing the teenage pregnancies. So I think there's got to be a lot more action and solutions instead of talking about the problems over and over again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to take one more hand, Kwanda, the lady at the back with the bob. Yes, that's you.
I'll be quick. And I'm hoping
Thank
to
you.
give you something you could actually solve. I'm also a CEO of an NGO. We work in schools locally. I work in 6 schools within 5 kilometers from this building. Our tagline is tackling trauma together. It's a school of hard knocks. We provide emotional literacy and support to schools. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the quintile 1 to 5 classification, the schools in the CBD are all classified as quintile 5, yet you have low and no fee schools on the doorstep. I have principals having to walk with their electricity bill up a main road, begging local businesses to help him keep his lights on. Yes, serious. I have a principal who gets to school every morning at 5 o'clock who makes porridge for his 500 students. That's not what he should be focused on.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the reclassification of these quintiles, please.
Okay, thank you. Folks, we're running out of time, so I'm going to want to ask the panelists to respond so that we can also wrap up on time. I don't want to keep you beyond the hour. So, Eddie, I'm going to start with you. Again, I think underlying the question of social workers, but I think it also connects to the question earlier around public employment programs and the opportunity that provides on the ground, but also the question of crime in terms of city properties, the question around SAPs, public housing.
So I think I just want to maybe comment on 1 or 2 other matters as well, in addition to those 2 points that you've mentioned. I have those listed here. And Brett is absolutely right. I mean, he was the political principal for the department that I'm now responsible for. And of course, you can see the progress that I've spoken about early on. But he misrepresented the sports management policy. So what has happened there, we went out to the community and saying, if you are able to manage the facility, and you want to generate additional revenue for the precinct, and you have the capacity to do that, to give an example, like Hamilton's Rugby Club or Fallsburg Rugby Club out in Constantia, then we have this policy for you to consider, and you can enter into agreement as a municipal facilities management committee. So you have those rights, and you can choose category 1, where you take over the management of the site, you get the revenue, and you reinvest the revenue there. The additional 2 categories, category 2 was if you don't have the capacity to do that, but you want to explore some commercial activity, then of course we can go into partnership and we will remain 50% liable. And category 3 within that policy would be that we would still remain liable for the sports spring. So it's not necessarily entirely correctly framed. The program that Brett spoke about, the Model Urban Regeneration Program, the principles that I spoke about are precisely from the methodology there. We still have the program. We have it across the city. We have quite a few areas, and I'll give you a few examples. Mitchells Plain Town Centre, Ocean View, Lavendale area, Weinberg Public Transport Interchange, Nyanga, Guletu, and the 2 sites in Kaidicha as well. So that program is certainly is the lead department in terms of the whole of society approach, and how do we crowd in and compel the other departments to invest in infrastructure there. I intentionally mentioned density point, Brett, because ARUs are important. Again, it was misrepresented because what you see the city is currently doing now, we are saying to the person that's living informally, already there, you're living in a hockey or a shack, you have no services inside the unit. We are saying to you, how do we assist you to have a more dignified housing opportunity? You are paying approximately 1,500 minimum and approximately 2,500 or 2,800 for a Wendy house. And this particular program is now able to offer you a bricks and mortar structure with services inside that unit for the same rental, delivered by the private property owner, financed not by the city. We're enabling the environment by changing the zoning scheme to allow for development for structures that are already there. So it's not new people that are moving in there. We're saying if you're living as a backyard dweller, speak to the homeowner, let's have a conversation. And what further excites me about this particular program is the fact that it's able to now offer an opportunity to an unemployed homeowner. It's the only plan that we have in the country that responds to informality. And so that's a very, very important program. And we put some seed funding in there, about 20 million to enable the fund and also the local planning support. So the 188 areas that have been identified based on what criteria? The criteria that I've just mentioned early on. It's already happening. And often the question that we are asked is, what about Constantia and Bishop's Court? And the point is, if the need is there, we'll most certainly consider those. But what you do see in those areas, they've not optimally utilized the second and the third dwelling provisions within the zoning scheme. So if there's a need, we'll consider them. But at the moment, currently we're responding to that context in those areas there. I absolutely agree with the concern about the non-motorized transport policy. I spent 42 years of my life in Mitchells Plain, and now I stay in the southern suburbs. And what I see, it's amazing when I cycle, I can sort of get onto the pedestrian pathway. There's a drop curb, but in Mitchells Plain, there's not. You don't find that. So that, of course, must be remedied. And you'd see now, for those in Mitchells Plain, Mr. Jacobs, you would know on Velderfreedom Parkway, that is now being changed over time. So it's the apartheid spatial planning legacies are systematically being responded to. And we can only do so much that the budget allows us to do, because we know if we increase the property rates and taxes, we know that's also not sustainable, because then affordability will also become an issue. Suzette, that beautiful program that you spoke about, you were very instrumental in driving that. It's still there, ma'am. The Strengthening Families program, I've been invited multiple occasions to be a speaker at that very initiative as well, across the city, specifically the Strengthening Family program, vulnerable groups, women and children, disabilities and youth. All of those programs are still very much there. I don't know why you have the impression that it's not there, but most certainly it is there. And
we'll hold there, Eddie. I'm gonna jump in. 1 minute, fraud and corruption. We are angry.
I was going to get to that point.
No, I think the fraud and corruption point is a really valid one. And I recently met with someone from Waste Management, for example, who told me about contracts that are awarded to 4 or 5 contractors to do street sweeping in one area. But only one of those companies is doing it, maybe, because there also could be an EPWP program operating in the same area. So there is something wrong in the City of Cape Town supply chain management process. And we've seen some of these raids which show you that there's something wrong there. So fraud and corruption is a problem, and it is obviously stealing from services that people need. I want to just respond to the suggestion that I misrepresented the sports asset management program. It's important because it's about children. And I went on Saturday on an 8-hour trip across the metro, visiting sports fields, where thousands and thousands and thousands of little kids are playing, regardless of the condition of the field. Whether it's a dust bowl in Bonteheuwel, in Browns Farm in Philippi, in Hedeveld or a beautiful lawn in Edgemead and Bottersig. There are thousands of children playing. Obviously, on the other side of the N1, those children are on the field and not on the streets where it's dangerous. And it is the facilities management committees and the local football associations themselves who told me that we cannot afford to keep this field in good condition. The city does not provide irrigation. It does not mow the lawn. It does not provide lines. It does not provide nets. So it is not true that these clubs agreed to take on this responsibility. They themselves have told me they are not able to take on the responsibility. And in any event, it is a city facility. It's owned by the public and it's in the custody of the city. The city should maintain those sports facilities at a standard that children can enjoy them as they should be enjoyed.
Kwanda, I'm going to close off with you. It was a question from online. Why should ecosystems matter? And how does that impact centering children for development?
Oh, fantastic. No, I can definitely close with that. When I spoke at first, I spoke about that book, Why Nations Fail. There, they posit that good institutions make a better country. And it's not the case that you've got rich countries with good institutions, because one might think, well, in Scandinavia, of course they've got good institutions because they've got so much money. They proved unequivocally that it is the institutions themselves that can pull countries out of poverty. But now, I agree, maybe not consensus, we might never get it, but at least we never will. But if we all put children at the center, all the institutions, schools, churches, everybody talks about the development of children, then we will start to talk about trauma. We will start to talk about food. We will start to talk about serve and return, what each parent is doing with their child at home. We may start to talk about safety in the streets because children are the most vulnerable. Did you know that there's a study that came out, I forgot who wrote it, but they said the advent of SUVs on streets so much, so everybody, there's the most popular car type that's being bought, is leading to more children being involved in fatalities because people can't see them because the cars are so big. We can even have conversations as nuanced as that, but we must all be thinking and talking about children in order to do that. So all the institutions need to do that together.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience that's online. Thank you to the audience in the room. I know we didn't get to all of you, but we are going to close now. Rahima's going to just share some closing words of thanks.
Thank you so much. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists. I'm going to call on Felicia Oppelt, who is the project lead for Change Ideas and the organizer of the event, to do a vote of thanks.
I was told in view of the many questions that I had to keep it short. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kentse, for guiding the conversation and our panelists for engaging with each other and the audience. It's a very important time for us, and I think we tend to ignore election time. We only remember election times when we see those posters on the lamppost, street light post. And I think when we're talking about children, we remember that they cannot vote. And it's our responsibility to speak for them at the ballot box. And what disturbs me greatly about each election is that fewer and fewer of us turn up at the voting stations. And I think we need to do hard work to reverse that trend, because it's the only time that we, as citizens of this democracy, will have to tell our politicians that we do not agree with what they are doing and that we want them to pay attention to what is important to us, their citizens and their voters. So I think in your communities, especially the amazing civil society leaders who are here today, encourage everyone to vote. The last weekend of voter registration is right at the beginning of August. Those opportunities are rare, but they are so important. We saw it in the last national elections. And this time we're asking, who are our councillors? We only see them when it's canvassing time.
Yeah.
So if my good DA councillor wants my vote, I want to see him a lot more often. And I want to see my neighborhood benefit from him representing me. And I think that is a question that we should be asking of all our councillors in all our wards. And more importantly, we should be asking our councillors how they are ensuring that our suburbs are safe for our children, that they can walk down the sidewalk and be perfectly safe, that they can have a park to play in, a library to visit. And I don't think that we are asking for extraordinary things. I think the things we want for our children are quite ordinary. And with that, my sermon will end.
Thank
I
you.
thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia. Wise words. So that brings us to the end of this evening. I want to thank everyone who has been watching online and those in the audience for bringing your passion, for bringing your honesty, and for bringing your fury, your anger, because that's important. So this isn't as I mentioned at the beginning, there are going to be 2 more conversations, one in Johannesburg and one in Durban in the months to come. If you can't join us in person, you can watch the live stream online. Before you leave, there are some booklets on your underneath your chairs or on your chairs. Take them home. They speak to what Kentse spoke about earlier when she asked about what opportunities are we not leveraging. What opportunities are we not leveraging when it comes to food insecurity, when it comes to supporting pregnant women who don't have enough food to eat, who are not accessing antenatal care? So those are some of the policy briefs that you'll find. Have a good evening. Please do join us for refreshments, and thank you, those online.